Hey everyone, Ali here. So schools are about to open, and if your team hasn't already, they will probably start to talk to you about situations with their kids and whether or not they can remain at work while their kids are at home with distance learning, or if they have to be home on some days because there's some sort of hybrid approach being pushed by the various school districts. This is something that varies really state to state and even county by county across the country. There's at least one state that has already opened up school. Most other states are going to open up either in 2 weeks or in the early fall. So you have to be ready for these conversations. And if the phone calls we're getting are any example of what's about to come, a lot of you are going to have very difficult and conversations with your teams about this because they are also in very difficult scenarios. So we wanted to go through some of the things that you need to kind of keep in mind as you're going through this process. And there's a lot of questions that I'm going to go through right now that we're getting that I think is important for you to hear the answers to, so that you can better prepare yourself on how to handle this. And then at the end, I'm going to give you some sort of practical advice as well that might be very helpful. So the first question is whether it's considered a school closure under the FFCRA if schools are opening up, but they are requiring their students to study at home, do distance learning, or maybe some hybrid approach where they're maybe at school for part of the time and they're at home part of the time. So the Department of Labor has now said that that is considered closed. And so as a result of that, those employees would qualify potentially under the FFCRA. Now, I'm going to talk about the finance portion of the FFCRA a little bit later, but that's an important fact for you to know. So even if some of the time they are home, some of the time they are at school in some sort of hybrid approach, that is also potentially covered by the FFCRA. So keep that in mind. Now, one offshoot of that is that what if the kids can be at home by themselves, and they have been, let's say, historically, but your employee chooses to be at home with them. So it's at their own discretion. In that situation, is it covered under FFCRA? And the answer to that is no. So if a parent or one of your employees chooses to be home with their child, and they have other options, whether it be that school is open and in session for live for live education, but the parent chooses to have the child stay at home, or maybe there's another parent or someone else that can take care of the child at home, but your employee chooses to be the one that stays at home, then under that scenario, then the FFCRA potentially doesn't apply, and your employee could be sort of out of luck in that regard. Now, one of the questions we get with regard to all of this is, well, how do I do proper record keeping? As you guys know, at HR for Health, we're all about record keeping. It's your first line of defense across the board for almost anything HR. So in this regard, it's the same way. What kind of record keeping do I need when my employees take or are trying to take paid sick leave or paid family leave under this scenario? Now, what I'm about to describe to you and the things we're going to go through in a second apply regardless of whether you deny their request or you grant their request for paid sick leave, right? So just keep that in mind. But here are the things you need, okay? So if someone's asking for paid sick leave or paid family leave, you need the name of the employees who's requesting the leave, of course, the date for which the leave is requested, the time period, the reason for the leave, and then this is the most important part, which is a statement from the employee that he or she is unable to work because of the stated reason, whatever the reason is. So that statement is very, very important, okay, very important. Now, let's talk about quarantine. What if the employee is subjected to some sort of federal, state, or county quarantine or isolation order, right? In that situation, what kind of documentation is needed for you to have as the employer? So if that's the reason and school is out, then you need the name of the child that they're taking care of, the name of the school, the place of the or the place of daycare, or childcare that may apply, that's unavailable, and then also another statement from your employee that no other suitable person was available to take care of the child. Okay, so those are the requirements. Very, very important to get that in order in case you're granting it or whether you're denying it, as you need proof of these factors. The IRS may require it, if they ever audit you. The Department of Labor may, if any issues come up. So kind of just keep that in mind. Now, one other question that we get is, what if I have a high school kid who's doing distance learning and they can be home alone, but the parent doesn't want them to be home alone? What about in that situation, right? What about in that situation? And in that situation, you have to remember that if the child is 18 years or older, I know most high school students are younger than that, but let's just start there. If a child is 18 years or older, this doesn't necessarily apply to them, okay? Unless the child is disabled. And in that situation, there could be some variance, right? But if a child is 18 years or older, then this doesn't apply. Okay, so just kind of keep that in mind. Now, if the child is less than 18 years or older and they are a high school kid and they're normally at home, but the employee chooses to be home at this point in time, and you don't want to grant that, then you got to go through the protocols that we just described, and the employee has to, in essence, state why it's necessary for them to be home when in the past they haven't had the necessity to be home with that child. Why is it a requirement? And that, again, the fact that the parent doesn't want to be home is different than them being required to be home because there's no other childcare or whatnot. If it's their own decision and they don't have a real, reason for it, it's not medically related, it's not, some other important reason, then unfortunately, they may not be covered by FFCRA. So just kind of keep that in mind. Another question we get is, may the employees take paid sick leave intermittently while working at their usual work site? And so if you agree with the employee that they can take their paid sick leave intermittently, then yes, that can happen. And depending on your relationship with the employee, you may want to allow that to occur. So just kind of keep that in mind as well. That I think is an important point. Now, some of you are going to ask about the small business exemption. So the small business exemption, where you have to have less than 50 employees, and this is the important part, okay? You have to be able to state that you cannot, right? This employee, right, not being in your office would jeopardize the viability of the business. Okay, would jeopardize the viability of the business. That's an important part of this. And so that's the only way to kind of get that exemption. Now, there is some talk of this exemption kind of changing a little bit. We're waiting for some clarification from the Department of Labor in various ways. But that could be something that comes down the pipe. But for right now, you can only be exempt if you have less than 50 employees, and your business could not be viable as a business without this employee. So that's the only exemption that right now can probably apply for you under number 5 under the sick leave rules, which has to do with childcare. Okay. Now, let's talk about wage replacement. How does this work under the FFCRA? So as most of you know, there's 2 versions of it, right? There's the emergency FMLE and then emergency sick leave. So for under emergency sick leave, you have to pay 2/3 if the reason for the leave is childcare, you have to pay 2/3 of the wage replacement for that employee for and up to $200 a day for the equivalent of a 2-week period. So if the employee works 4 days a week, that's 32 hours a week times 2, that's 64 hours. So you would pay that employee 2/3 of their wage for up to 64, for up to 64 hours in this example. All right. That's for the first 2 weeks. And then, right, they get another 10 weeks of leave under emergency FMLE, okay? And that is also at 2/3 of their regular wage, and with a maximum of $200 a day, okay? So just kind of keep that in mind. In essence, they could get up to 12 weeks of leave at 2/3 pay, up to a maximum of $200. The practical advice that I referenced to earlier is that all of this is reimbursable to you through your quarterly payroll tax returns. So if you value these employees, you want them back, you want to be flexible, it's important for you to have them back after all of this is done, then in those scenarios you may want to provide this leave to them, and pay for it. Because it could turn into a cash flow issue for you, but you will get that money back. So just make sure that you're setting aside funds to be able to provide this. You do have to be aware that this could occur to multiple of your employees, and so there could be a pretty significant cash outlay for them. Again, you're going to get the money back through your quarterly tax returns, payroll tax returns, but that being said, you still have to pay the money, and you also have to pay for their replacement most likely. So keep that in mind. So again, with the rules with schooling, it's it most likely, depending on your county and your state, your employees will qualify under the FFCRA. So they should most likely be paid, unless it is up to them and it's their choosing to stay at home, but they're not necessarily required to stay at home. And they have alternative options. Okay. If you have any questions, let us know. Thanks.